I now have pleasure in welcoming Professor Ricci to give the second talk, and as I mentioned earlier, she is going to speak on the subject, the meaning of noceti ipsum. Is written in italics, not Italian. I'll explain what it means later on. In the practice of universal brotherhood. Graziella Ricci is professor ordinaire, means extraordinary professor, I suppose, at the University of Macerata, Italy, where she teaches Spanish literature and general linguistics and is director, it can mean chairman, of the PhD in Theory and Information and Communications Department. She collaborates as psychologist and trainer with Modelli di Comunicazione Institute in Milan. She has published 17 books in Italy. To me, she looks a very young person. You can look at her. So 17 is a big number.
Secure parents.
In Italy, Spanish, and Argentina. Some of them about Jorge L. Borges literature, and about 70 essays in collective volumes. That speaks a volume about her, doesn't it? She's a member of the Theosophical Society in Milan, where she has been president of one of the Milan groups for some years. And at present, she is a member of the Comitato Executivo, means executive committee, of the Italian National Section. Just before she goes to the podium to give her presentation, I said earlier I shall explain noceti ipsum. What does it mean? I have then been told it means know yourself. I invite Professor Ricci.
Good morning, dear friends. Buongiorno, cari amici. Buenos días, queridos amigos. As Mary Anders, I will say something in reply to the brother that I look young, but I'm not young, unfortunately. So, as Mary Anderson said yesterday, I preferred to say friends and not brothers, because brothers is a very big word, as I'll say during my lecture. I begin with Mahatma Gandhi phrase. We must be the change we desire to see in the world. I repeat, we must be the change we desire to see in the world. Gandhi's words are modern more than ever with regard to the events we are living on our planet, events that claim an urgent transformation of the human mind if we don't want to confess in a few years our failure as human beings and the moral duty to recognize that we are late to modify the present critical situation. Human beings who are obliged to interact with the world to proceed with evolution have ripened an extremely complex brain, but they have not used it in an efficient and ecological way. So at present, they must face a worldly situation they have produced with their egocentric and irresponsible acts. Then, to fight against this situation, we need an innovative shift that induces deep changes in the human consciousness. In this critical context, speaking of universal brotherhood is imperative, but not enough unless we can understand what is the real meaning of to act as brothers. Once, the Nobel winner Mexican poet Octavio Paz noted that there are three words that define modern democracy: freedom, equality, and brotherhood. And that the last one is the most important, because freedom can exist without equality, and equality without freedom. But the key concept that harmonizes and collects the two terms is brotherhood. This one refers not only to ideals of solidarity and of universal love, but also to the people who embodied these ideals, such as San Francesco de Assisi, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Luther King, Gandhi himself, and so on. However, in a theosophical context, the term brotherhood hints at something deeper, that is, finding and activating what we already are in the spiritual dimension in order to show this essence daily, and to act from the nucleus of it and not from the periphery. As well known, the universal brotherhood is the only principle we must endorse to become an effective member of the society. But are we really conscious of the implications of this acceptance and of the real meaning of the word when we address another member of the Theosophical Society as brother? In this report, I will explain some contradictions that, in my opinion, are implicit in our acts according to the practice of brotherhood. From our present knowledge level, we know that we are living in a constantly transforming universe, either in its static aspect, in the forms becoming more and more complex, or in its dynamic aspect, in its rhythmic movements produced by forms and events towards the aim of the one life. This aim could be summed up in becoming more and more aware of ourselves in the process of a progressive development of all sentient beings. However, even if we members of ETS are aware of this fact, our perception is influenced by several cultural and individual filters, reducing our view when we react to the solicitation of our life. So it could happen what happens to the reader of detective stories when we read the famous Agatha Christie's novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. The English writer used a clever expedient to mislead the reader, because the storytelling self is the murderer. But the reader realizes it just at the end, when the writer himself confesses the swindle. Not only does the writer reveal his real identity, but he makes the reader feel himself guilty for his ingenuity, because the teller has never covered up anything about the murder, and he left alone the text a great deal of signs to lead the wakeful reader to his real identity. But this does not happen because the reader does not suspect the one who has addressed him with complicity to encourage him to share his vicissitudes. As the reader gives the responsibility of the discovery to the detective, he reads in a constitutionally absent-minded way. Agatha Christie's novel leads to the extreme consequences, the thriller mechanics, in which the oblivial and persuasive potency of a text makes the reader unconscious, even if everything occurs clearly. The fact is that the reader reads in a rather subliminal way and overlooks some details dwelling in the story which seem apparently insignificant, but are not. So the lucidity of the narrator consists in telling us that we are not lucid. Probably in our everyday routine, we members of a Theosophical Society behave as the reader of detective stories. We lack lucidity in our life in spite of our theoretic knowledge. This condition of distraction and oblivion involves not only the events and the creatures in the world, but above all ourselves. If we are not aware of our being distracted because of our occupations and because of the mass media noises, we can't practice either the discernment, viveka, or the detachment, vairagya, both basic elements of a balanced self-esteem and essential to practice a real brotherhood. In fact, how could we practice the second Christian commandment if we don't know really the meaning of loving ourselves? Then the famous statement of the Delphic temple, Nosce te ipsum, know yourself, comes to mind. I say noscete ipsum as the classic pronunciation. In ancient Greece, in the East and still earlier, this knowledge was imperative. Many volumes have been published on this argument and also in the theosophical literature. But man finds difficult to change because it is easier to live in the well-known, and especially nowadays, he is too distracted to remember the deep meaning of the Delphic statement. This fact influences drastically the brotherhood practice. Also, the present does not help either. We are living in a more and more chaotic and changing millennium where time acceleration is too intense against the modifications of our brain, which still reacts according to the old schemes of strike and flight. Furthermore, the economic, multicultural, and migratory problems that involve all democratic societies strain the brotherhood practice all over the world. But we, as theosophists, should have a greater sensibility, and so we must wonder what we neglect when we believe to behave fraternally while we strongly and quietly keep our usual positions. Theosophy says that we are a soul dwelling for a short time in a physical body. So we could suppose that the most important thing is to pay more attention to the soul processes than to the physical ones. But perhaps this is not the right approach, because soul and body are a unique systemic whole, closely linked through the emotional and mental movements. They are different aspects of the one life, so we can pay attention to an aspect without the other one. Besides, the communication between body and minds seems to be interrupted by the rigidity of our character shield that has been formed through the childhood experiences, and now it has contracted our muscles with unconscious tensions and has fragmented our breath in discontinued and discordant movements. Most people are not aware of it and believe to move and breathe without any kind of problems. Some healing schools describe this process very well. For instance, according to the bioenergetics, each of us lives in a sort of open-eyed dream fed by a consensual, collective, and hypnotic reality. An unconscious play script written in the past. So people rarely experience the here and now, but twist the new situations and adjust them to their old childish schemes, which have produced a character shield due to the conflicts experienced in the past. This shield creates different patterns according to the phase of the block and to the different answers created to protect oneself from the world. The character shield, as a caterpillar, is tiered and divided into segments covering the whole body according to the different types of problem, and shows the fossilized history captured in the human's being growth process. Bioenergetic also says that the individual has three main layers unfolding themselves through the muscles and the character: the nucleus, the middle layer, and the surface. We must explore the middle layer to contact the nucleus or deep self, but a lot of people often take it for the real self and hide themselves under an apparently harmonic and socially accepted self-image. The middle layer is the shield we must break to know the real identity hidden under the stratifications. That is why many people don't want to change and grow, because they are afraid of what they could find if their ego loses control and allows the shield to become thinner. Instead, to revive the old sclerotic feelings, it is necessary to free the energy captured in the childhood, energy that binds body and mind in a schematic and compelling behavior, because where there is contraction, there is no sensation, and without sensations, there are no emotions. So we don't contact the reality of our being in the world. This creative archaeology moves from the premise that human beings are made of positive energy, and that the loving skill, frustrated and repressed during the development, is the basis of a healthy individual. When a conflict is surmounted, the energy grows and the human being may express better his creativity. Not easy, indeed, as Laue says, quote, "This society is not tuned on the values and the rhythms of the living body, but of the machines and the material productivity. We must conclude that the forces inhibiting self-expression and reducing our energy spring from this culture and belong to it." End of quotation. Besides, nowadays, a large part of human beings has problems concerning the emotional and physical domains, and what is worse, is distracted and confused, so they can distinguish the truth from the lie. At present, the media immerse the user into a vulgar illusion and into minimalist information, acting as a mirror which wipes out the limits between reality and fiction. Therefore, the possibility to stop false news becomes more and more unimportant. The need of discerning truth from false information is dying out. All these problems exist because the human being moves in a centrifugal way caused by the energetic blocks that make difficult the contact with the deep self. So, the real relationship with this body-man system depends on the movement of the energetic flux. Indeed, from the energetic point of view, the whole body could be considered a single cell, inside which the energetic vibration can freely circulate everywhere. Every human being is a community of about 50 trillion cells that develop a strategy of cooperation for the mutual existence, all the functions of our organs having been used by cells. The cooperative activity of every cell is fundamental. Every cell has enough intelligence to survive by itself and has been provided of intentional and aimed capacities, as well as skill in learning from experience. All these skills are recorded and transmitted to the doctor cells. So, in our way of behaving, we should follow the cooperative spirit of the cells. As we are systemic beings and love is related to the energetic flux, it is important to be aware of how we treat our communication channels to be able to reach the heart. That means mouth, throat, hands, arms, the whole muscular system of the chest linked with the heart, the abdomen and the feet. Love is physically expressed through the interaction of the whole body. Even our sight, our way of communication with other people, is very important because through our eyes, we express our emotional attitude. If you have traveled by train or by bus, and as I have observed the faces of people, you should have noted that they rarely smile. The expressions are often gloomy and severe. Many passengers look covered by a cloud of thoughts without joie de vivre, an essential aspect of the one life. But joy can't be forced. It springs from an attentive heart, and above all, a heart open to the spiritual dimension. Nevertheless, it is very difficult to speak of this dimension to a world hard-pressed by stress and hyperactivity. Some researchers of the Ben Gurion University of Israel found that during those rare moments in which doctors smiled because they were not stressed, medicine and analysis prescriptions decreased. This concept may be extended to all the scientific research. In fact, not only instruments such as microscopes and telescopes are important, but also a mental clearness, a deep insight, and a pure and joyous conscience to improve with harmony the scientific research. Only through light, the positive forces of soul may be attracted. Even knowledge is related to ethics and to the purification of bodies, intentions, and behaviors. In Light on the Path, it is written that we must grow as the flower opening to the eternity, but it should be eternity and not the desire of growth to produce the human being's development. The Dutch Hans Seil published in the 30s a series of studies in which he demonstrated the existence of an unspecific stress syndrome or adaptation syndrome involving all individuals. The author divided this phenomenon into 3 phases. In the first one, there is an alarm reaction that provokes nuisance. So the individual reacts with several organic symptoms, such as hyperactivity or gastric ulcer. In the second one, the most common today, there is a form of resistance to stress in which human being is no more aware of the overstimulation. He does not feel the nuisance of the energetic waste because stress has been removed. In the third one, when there comes the energetic breakdown, a sort of inner resources depletion, there is the emergency of physical and psychic well-defined symptoms. Today, in the West, above all, people are sliding unaware from the second to the third phase, and the energetic breakdown appears through many physical diseases, such as several kinds of neoplasia, or through a psychic petrified shield, giving lack of sensibility or apathy. Stress excess has brought about the loss of the skill of being amazed of nature, of arts, and of the wonderful recent scientific discoveries. The astonishment is one of the elements of the spring of creative wit. As members of the Theosophical Society, we should be prepared better. We know that we are a soul and body system, and that the meaning of existence is much more than the common personal and social goals, such as job, marriage, children, and so on. But we too have a character shield that stops our mind-body communication and endures the energetic depletion of this chaotic and accelerated period. Considering this situation, are we really aware of the difference that makes the difference between a common person and a member of the Theosophical Society? I repeat, are we really aware of the difference that makes the difference between a common person and a member of the Theosophical Society? When we don't like something inside the Theosophical movement, do we move with our hearts and minds focused on the one life, that is, on the deep meaning of the universal brotherhood, or do we react against these concepts? As we know, in theory, self-awareness has 2 aspects, the former cognitive and the latter experimental and interactive. However, we don't often realize that in everyday life, most conflicts we face don't depend on the reality of facts, but on the meaning we give to the facts. Therefore, even inside TS, it is easy to mistake the concept of life with life experience. We must keep in mind that as we ourselves are the means by which we know ourselves, we are already contaminated, and that, unknowing, we contaminate what we know. We must humbly accept the fact that we tend unconsciously to change reality according to the logic of self-deceit. Therefore, as we can avoid this in everyday experience, let's try to avoid it in the practice of brotherhood, as acting by mental process means to enclose infinity within a limitation of a cognitive type. The result is that, so doing, any real spiritual move is stopped. In fact, we often make the mistake of trying to replace the experience of the one life with a series of abstractions about universal brotherhood and about ourselves, which means to be in contact not with the reality of a spiritual dimension, but with a conceptual image. Here is an example. If someone makes or says something which irritates the interlocutor, the latter is usually affected by negative emotions, which make him change his expression, tone of voice, and gestures. If the negative emotions are not accepted, and the person is not aware of his refusal because this disagrees with his own idealized image, some part of his personality will fall in struggle with the other parts. If feeling like that, this person will address the other one as brother because he rationally knows that he is a brother, then the gap between reality and appearance will be felt through his gestures and his way of talking or of keeping silence. And the other one will realize it unconsciously. This fact will cause a sense of disharmony, even if everything seems to be all right. We might conclude then that if we fail to accept in every moment who we really are, we may generate a similar forced situation. But we must also take into consideration the logic of self-deceit, which interferes with our perceptions. Even on a neurological level, the gap between the different levels of verbal and non-verbal behavior is to be felt because different chains in mirror neurons are activated in us according to the purpose we perceive in the person before us. So let us repeat our initial question. Are we able to love our neighbor as ourselves without prejudices and preconceptions? Are we able to perceive the neighbor as a brother in the most authentic way? Perhaps an answer may be given in the way we usually consider this matter. At first, to learn, and then to act, which is the usual way we learn. Even if a theosophist should take for granted that if we work only with theory, we aren't in contact with experience, we don't always realize that only by interacting with other people we can get in touch with authentic life. Neurosciences teach that unlike what is usually believed, theory is influenced by efficient solutions and not the contrary. That is, instead of learning in order to change, we must change in order to learn. Instead of learning in order to change, we must change in order to learn. This reversal shifts the level of learning from a linear causality to a circular action, interaction, and knowledge of a problem and of its solutions. We must learn how to learn what learning through direct action means. Solution will come from action, not merely from knowledge. Anyway, each one of us may have a personal answer to that question, but no matter which could be the solution, what is important is to pay attention to the question and repeat it every time we address someone else, calling him brother. In ancient Zen Buddhism, two kinds of truths were considered, the essence truth and the mistake truth. The former is very rare because the transcendent essence can be reached while living on earth only by illumination. On the contrary, the mistake truth deals with the truth connected to our relationship with earthly things, and it is regarding this truth that we can make our action better and better. In the frame of emotional intelligence, self-awareness represents the basic technique to understand our negative response in the moment it is born, and to be able to overcome and defeat it. Talking about the suffering that comes from negative emotion, Dalai Lama explains that it is important to be untouched by external circumstances to be able to face negative emotion, which means to have no interest in pleasure, pain, fame, obscurity, praise, and shame. Dalai Lama calls this solution spirit of emergency, which implies, I quote, a total detachment from samsara in its globality. The spirit of emergency should at this point stop us from mixing negative emotions with affinities of thought. As Krishnamurti would say, in order to start a voyage to discover the remotest corners of our mind, we must get rid of any burden and travel without any prejudices, creeds, certainties, or conclusions. And so we are back to the two conditions we have already mentioned, discernment and detachment, viveka and vairagya. Now the conclusion. If at this point you expect some solution, you will be disappointed as no easy solution is given. However, I would like to underline that whatever degree we have reached in our awareness, We must trust the wisdom of the Spirit, as movement is the essential thing in life. Decay starts if development stops. Therefore, going deeper inside our own awareness is a stimulus to go on along the difficult but fascinating journey in the unknown land that each one of us has inside, once we stop needing any external help, which may be either our therapist or a book or a spiritual guide, as the role of guide can come from various directions. Keeping in mind that knowing oneself allows neurons to regenerate even after 60 or 70 years old, and that besides emotional intelligence and rational intelligence, there exists a spiritual intelligence, which is activated by meditation. As we ask a deep research into the essential meanings of life, it is fundamental to renovate our challenge to the noscete ipsum, which implies various strategies, such as, for example, reviving our availability to search for truth and acting more and more on the basis of observation and experiences, and not on second-hand beliefs and thoughts. Taking on the responsibility of our own discoveries and accepting doubts, paradoxes, and uncertainties whenever it is impossible to get actual answers. And above all, accepting shadow zones in ourselves and in the others, trying to develop a systemic way of acting where body and mind are integrated and in harmony with the spirit. Practicing meditation in order to bring our brain to vibrate homogeneously at 40 Hertz, to be able to activate the spiritual intelligence which will allow us to act according to the authentic spirit of brotherhood. By so doing, we will be able to recognize by our heart the profound interconnection which ties all the sentient beings of the universe, and will be able to create sympathy and peace in the little world which surrounds us. In this way, we will have stamina enough to carry on our endless journey, whose destination is the discovery of the almost unknown land of the spiritual dimension, thus cooperating to the rebirth of our soul-staminal cells in order to let them multiply by endless resonance in the hearts of human beings. The spirit of brotherhood is more necessary today than in the past to modify the problems on the planet. This journey, like all never-ending journeys, has no end. What matters is walking. Light on the path confirms this with the well-known sentence, "You will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame." In order to renew our aim of developing our awareness, we might talk of bioeco-theosophy. That's to say, we could try to intensify the meaning of the word theosophy by talking of bioeco-theosophy, so as to always remember that we are a system interacting in the various dimensions of mind, body, and social and ecological context of a planet which is itself a system interacting at a highly more complex level. We must also remember that our system becomes actually brotherly only when it is steeped in the light of the spirit. We should keep this in mind whenever a negative emotion stops our mind from reflecting the spiritual light. Because even if we are made of quanta energy, the spirit manages to illuminate the so-called lower bodies of our personality only if they are flowing and open to the infinite. The voice of silence claims that we must go beyond the thresholds of ignorance, instruction, and wisdom to be able to reach the state in which light and silence become a unique experience linked to our deep self. Only when we have reached that point, we will be able to call ourselves brothers in the most authentic theosophical sense of the word. Considering that the use of language is not neutral as it affects our action, to speak about bioeco-theosophy might help us to bring back to memory the systemic aspects of our behavior and might drive us to go towards the essential dimensions where brotherhood becomes not simply an intellectual concept, but a spontaneous, joyful, and authentic way of living. I wonder whether in this linguistic pun, which is not simply a pun, involving the different dimensions suggested by the word, whereby bio is meant the purification of physical, emotional, and mental aspects, and by echo, the ethical relationship with the environment and with our neighbors, the term theosophy might resound more profoundly in our hearts, so as to make us deeply aware and more open to the responsibilities asked for by our time, being as true researchers of the spirit. I will end by quoting Krishnamurti's words, which leave no doubt as to the direction we should follow. Quote, "The energy which we get by freeing from any kind of fear brings about a radical inner revolution. In that way, you are alone with yourselves. And since you are no more asking anything or anyone for help, you are free to discover. The next difficulty, which is highly greater, is to reject your inner authority. To be free from any authority, either yours or someone else, means dying to everything that belongs to yesterday. We can learn and observe only in a similar state. To do this, a great awareness is necessary, a true awareness of what happens inside yourself without trying to correct it or to suggest what it should or shouldn't be, as in the moment when you correct it, you establish a new authority, that is the censor. In order to love, we must be free not only from the other person, but also from ourselves. I repeat this in Italian and Spanish. Per amare bisogna essere liberi non solo dall'altra persona, ma anche da se stessi. Para amar hay que ser libres, no solo del otro, sino también de sí mismo. Thank you.